A floorboard gave way beneath her foot. Eleanor Brennan grabbed for the doorframe, but the wood crumbled in her hand like wet paper. Her knee hit the floor hard, the kind of hard that jolts your spine when you're past 70. She stayed there, breathing, one leg dangling into darkness below. The hallway smelled like salt and rot and something else, something older. Every window on the first floor was broken. The front door hung on a single hinge. She'd bought this place 3 hours ago, $250. The auctioneer laughed when she raised her hand. Nobody else bid. Nobody had bid in years. Now here she was, 72 years old, one leg hanging through a hole in the floor of a mansion that had swallowed 9 families whole. Her name was Eleanor Brennan. Most people called her Ellie, and this crumbling seaside mansion was the only thing she owned in the world. She pulled her leg out slowly. The edges of the hole scraped against her calf, drawing blood she could feel but couldn't see in the dim light. She sat back against the wall and caught her breath. Her heart was going fast. Not from fear exactly, from something closer to recognition. Like she'd been heading toward this moment for a long time and only just realized it. The ocean was loud outside, waves hitting rocks somewhere below the bluff. The sound came through every broken window, filled every empty room. This house had been listening to that sound for over 100 years, listening and waiting. Ellie hadn't always been broke. She'd been a high school English teacher for 38 years in a small town outside Portland. Good pension, small house with blue shutters, and a garden out back that grew tomatoes every summer without fail. She had a system for the tomatoes. Stakes and string and careful pruning. Harold used to tease her about it, said she treated those plants better than she treated him. Harold, her husband, the man who fixed lawnmowers in the garage and never once forgot their anniversary. 41 years of marriage. 41 years of waking up next to the same person, knowing exactly how he took his coffee, knowing the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, knowing the way he hummed when he was working on something with his hands. They didn't have kids. They tried. It didn't happen. And after a while, they stopped being sad about it and started being grateful for each other. That was enough. More than enough, actually. Some people spend their whole lives looking for what Ellie and Harold had. Some people never find it at all. Then Harold died, quietly, in his sleep. The kind of death people call peaceful, which always felt like a lie to Ellie because there was nothing peaceful about waking up next to a body that used to be her husband. She'd reached over to touch his shoulder the way she did every morning. Just a touch. Just to say she was awake. And his skin was cold. Not cool, cold. The kind of cold that has no warmth left in it at all. She didn't scream. She didn't call 911 right away. She just lay there with her hand on his back and said his name. Once. Quietly. Like she was disappointed in him for leaving him without saying goodbye. That was 9 years ago. The pension covered the mortgage for a while. Then the roof needed replacing. $12,000 she didn't have. She took out a loan. Then her knees needed replacing. One first, then the other. Insurance covered part of it, not enough. She took out another loan. Then property taxes went up and the pension didn't cover much of anything anymore. She sold the house with the blue shutters. The house where she'd lived with Harold for 37 years. The house where the tomatoes grew every summer. A young couple bought it. They were nice. They talked about painting the shutters a different color. Ellie smiled and said that sounded lovely, and then she went to her car and sat there for 20 minutes before she could drive away. She moved into a studio apartment that smelled like other people's cooking. Curry and fish and something burnt that never quite went away. She sold most of what she owned. Books she'd had since college. Furniture she and Harold had picked out together. The dining table where they'd eaten 10,000 meals. She sold Harold's tools. That one hurt worse than the house. His wrenches and screwdrivers and the old red toolbox with the dent in the side from when he'd dropped it off the ladder in 1987. She could still hear him laughing about that, laughing and rubbing his foot where the toolbox had landed. She sold it all to a kid who didn't even know what half the tools were for. $50. $50 for 40 years of Harold's weekends. When the money ran out for good, she started living in her car. A 2004 Honda Civic with a bad heater and a passenger seat that wouldn't recline. She'd owned that car for 19 years. It had taken her and Harold to the coast 100 times. Now it was her bedroom and her living room, and her kitchen all in one. She kept a cooler in the back seat with water and bread and peanut butter. She kept a flashlight in the glove compartment. She kept a photograph of Harold tucked into the sun visor where she could see it every morning when she woke up. 72 years old, sleeping in a Honda Civic in January in Maine. That's not a life. That's a slow way to stop being alive. She parked in the lot behind the public library most nights because the security guard, a young man named Derek Holloway, had been one of her students. Class of 2005. He'd been a quiet kid, sat in the back row and wrote poetry that he never showed anyone except her. She'd told him he had talent. She'd told him to keep writing. He'd listened. Now he was 34 years old and working the night shift at a library, and he pretended not to see the old Honda Civic parked in the corner of the lot every night. He left her alone. Sometimes he brought her coffee in the morning, hot with cream and sugar, the way she liked it. He never said much, just handed her the cup and nodded and walked away. But she could see it in his face, the same thing she saw in her own face when she looked in the rearview mirror, shame, the specific shame of watching someone you respect fall so far. She found out about the mansion the way most people find out about things they shouldn't buy, a flyer on a bulletin board at a gas station. She'd gone inside to use the bathroom, and there it was pinned between an advertisement for lawn care and a missing cat poster. County tax auction, delinquent property, starting bid $250. The place was called Stone Ridge Manor. Sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic about 40 minutes north of town. 3 stories, 26 rooms, built in 1891 by a doctor whose name nobody remembered anymore. The photograph on the flyer was old black and white, taken when the house was new. It looked like something out of a novel. Wraparound porch, tall windows, a widow's walk on the roof where someone could stand and watch the sea. The current photographs told a different story. Gray clapboard siding, half of it peeling away like dead skin. Windows boarded shut on the 3rd floor. The porch sagging in the middle like a broken spine. But the bones were there. Even in those photographs, Ellie could see it. The house had been built to last. It had been built by someone who understood that a house is more than walls and a roof. It's a container for lives, for memories, for all the things that happen between the moments we remember. The flyer said the house had been sold 9 times since the 1960s. Every owner left. Some after months, some after weeks. One family lasted exactly 4 days. The father loaded the kids into the car at 3 in the morning and drove away with the headlights off. Like he didn't want the house to see him leaving. Like he was afraid of what it might do if it knew. Nobody talked about why. People in town just said the house was wrong. Not haunted. That it wasn't the word they used. They said wrong, like something in the bones of the place didn't work the way a house should. Like the angles were off, or the walls didn't meet where they were supposed to, or the shadows fell in directions that didn't match the light. The local paper had run a story about it once, called it the most unwanted address in the county. The reporter had treated it like a joke, a quirky local interest piece, something to fill space on a slow news day. But the families who'd lived there didn't laugh when asked about it. Most of them refused to talk at all. One woman, the wife of the man who'd driven away at 3 in the morning, had grabbed the reporter's arm and said only one thing. "Don't go in." That was it. Don't go in. Then she'd walked away and never spoke to anyone about Stonebridge Manor again. Ellie read all of this standing in the gas station bathroom. She'd pulled the flyer off the board and taken it with her. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it up and put it in her pocket and went back to her car. She sat there for a long time looking at nothing. $250. She had $260 in her checking account. That was it. Her entire net worth. 60 years of working and saving and being careful, and she had $260 in a car that might not start when the temperature dropped below 20. She could buy this house. She knew it was crazy. She knew the house was probably a disaster. She knew there were reasons nobody else wanted it, reasons that went beyond sagging porches and boarded windows. But she also knew something else. She was out of options. The shelters were full. The waiting lists for subsidized housing were 3 years long. Derek couldn't let her park in the library lot forever. Sooner or later, someone would complain. Sooner or later, she'd have to move on. And there was nowhere to move on to. This house was a chance. Maybe the only chance she had left. The auction was on a Tuesday morning in the basement of the county courthouse. Ellie drove out in her Civic with everything she owned in the back seat. 2 suitcases, a box of books she couldn't bear to sell, the photograph of Harold that usually lived on the sun visor now tucked safely in her purse. She wore the nicest clothes she had left. A gray wool coat that had belonged to her mother. A blue scarf Harold had given her for their 30th anniversary. She looked almost respectable. Almost like someone who had a home to go back to. The auctioneer was a county clerk named Phil who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He had a stack of properties to get through and not enough coffee to make it bearable. The basement smelled like dust and old paper and the particular staleness of rooms that don't get used often enough. 3 people showed up for the auction. An older man in a hunting jacket who was there for a piece of land on the other side of the county. A young woman in a business suit who worked for some development company. And Ellie. The development company woman perked up when Stonebridge came up. Phil read off the details in a bored monotone. 3 stories, 26 rooms, oceanfront property, significant structural issues, unpaid taxes totaling $43,000. Starting bid $250. The woman in the suit looked at her phone, typed something, waited, looked at her phone again. Then she shook her head and sat back in her chair. Ellie raised her hand. Phil looked at her like she'd just volunteered to jump off a bridge. Going once, he said, going twice, sold to the lady in the gray coat. He said it like he was apologizing. She drove to Stonebridge that same afternoon. The coast road wound along the edge of the Atlantic, climbing higher and higher until the water was 100 feet below, crashing against rocks that looked like broken teeth. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that means rain is coming, the kind of gray that seeps into everything and makes the whole world look tired. She found the turnoff almost by accident, a gravel road that split off from the main highway and disappeared into a stand of pine trees. There was no sign, no mailbox, nothing to indicate that anyone had lived there in years. The road was rough. Her Civic bounced and scraped along the gravel for half a mile before the trees opened up and the house appeared. Ellie stopped the car. She sat there for a long time, idling, just looking. It was massive. 3 stories of gray clapboard rising against the gray sky. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle. Half the railings were missing. The front steps listed to one side like a drunk trying to keep his balance. Every window on the first floor was broken. Glass scattered across the porch like scattered teeth. But it was the 3rd floor that made her catch her breath. Every window was boarded shut. From the inside. Heavy boards nailed across the frames, blocking out all light. Like someone had sealed that whole floor away from the rest of the house. Like they'd wanted to make sure nothing could get out. Or nothing could get in. She turned off the engine and got out of the car. The wind hit her immediately, cold and sharp and carrying the smell of salt and something else, something organic. The house groaned in the wind like a living thing, wood creaking, boards shifting, sounds that could have been the settling of an old structure or could have been something else entirely. She walked up to the front porch. The steps held her weight barely. The boards bent under her feet but didn't break. She crossed the porch slowly, testing each step before she committed to it. The front door hung on a single hinge. It was open about 6 inches, swaying slightly in the wind. She pushed it the rest of the way open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Rot and salt and mold and something sweeter underneath. Something that reminded her of old books, old paper. The particular scent of time passing in enclosed spaces. The foyer was large. A staircase rose up on the right, curving toward the 2nd floor. The wallpaper was peeling off the walls in long strips that hung like dead skin. The floor was covered in debris, broken glass, fallen plaster, leaves that had blown in through broken windows and never blown out again. She took 3 steps forward. That's when the floor gave way. Now she sat against the wall, her leg bleeding, her heart racing, and she didn't leave. She had nowhere to leave to. She pulled herself up slowly, using the wall for support. Her knee ached, not the sharp pain of something broken, the dull throb of something bruised. She'd live. She'd lived through worse. She made her way carefully around the hole in the floor, testing each board before she put her weight on it. The foyer opened into a hallway that ran the length of the house, doors on either side, most of them hanging open, revealing rooms full of shadows and debris. She explored the first floor slowly. The dining room. Ceiling collapsed in one corner, exposing the bones of the floor above. A massive table still sat in the center of the room, covered in dust and fallen plaster. 8 chairs arranged around it, 2 of them overturned. The living room, furniture draped in sheets that had once been white and were now gray with age and dirt. A fireplace big enough to stand in the mantel cracked down the middle. Windows looking out toward the ocean, most of them broken, letting in the sound of the waves. The kitchen, a rusted stove, cabinets with doors hanging off their hinges. A sink stained brown with decades of mineral deposits. The faucet rusted shut. Everything was bad. Everything was worse than she'd imagined. And yet, the bones were there. She could see it now that she was inside. The framing was old-growth timber, thick as railroad ties. The foundation was granite block, each piece fitted together with the precision of a master builder. This house wasn't falling down. It was falling apart on the surface, but underneath it was built to last centuries. Someone had known what they were doing when they built this place. Someone had built it to survive. She made her way to the second floor as the sun began to set. The stairs were intact mostly, a few boards missing near the top. She climbed carefully, holding the railing, even though it swayed under her hand. The second floor was in better shape than the first, less water damage, less collapse. The hallway stretched out in front of her, doors on either side, most of them closed. She found a bedroom near the end of the hall. The door was stuck. She had to put her shoulder into it to get it open. Inside, a 4-poster bed sat against the far wall. The mattress was old but not destroyed. No holes, no obvious mold. A window looked out toward the ocean, glass intact, the last light of day coming through in long golden rays. She could sleep here. She went back to the car and got her things. 2 trips up and down the stairs, her knees protesting the whole way. She dragged the mattress away from the wall, swept the floor with a piece of cardboard she found in the hallway, and laid out her sleeping bag. She ate dinner sitting on the floor. Peanut butter sandwich. Bottle of water. The same meal she'd been eating for months. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, she was eating it in a house. Her house, the first house she'd owned since she sold the place with the blue shutters. Outside, the sun finished setting. The ocean turned from gold to silver to black. The sound of the waves filled the room, constant and eternal. She lay back on her sleeping bag and closed her eyes. And that's when she heard the footsteps. It was past midnight. She'd been drifting in and out of sleep, not quite able to fully let go. The house made noises, creaks and groans, and the sound of the wind finding its way through cracks and gaps. She'd gotten used to it. It was just the sound of an old house settling. But this was different. This was footsteps, clear and distinct, coming from directly above her, the 3rd floor, slow, deliberate steps, not the random creaking of boards, not the sound of an animal moving through the walls. This was someone walking, someone pacing back and forth directly above her head. Ellie sat up. Her heart was going fast now, faster than it had when she'd fallen through the floor. That had been an accident, a physical danger she could understand. This was something else. She listened. The footsteps continued, back and forth, back and forth. The same pattern, the same rhythm, like someone walking the length of a room, walking back, over and over again. She grabbed her flashlight and got out of the sleeping bag. The hallway was dark. Her flashlight cut a narrow beam through the blackness. She made her way to the 3rd floor staircase, following the sound of those footsteps. She found the stairs at the end of the hall. They rose up into darkness, narrow and steep. She put her foot on the first step. Solid. The second step. Solid. The third step. Still solid. Then she looked up. The bottom 6 steps were intact. But above that, the staircase was gone. Just open air and broken framing all the way up to a door at the top. A door that was closed. A door that looked solid and heavy even from 30 feet below. There was no way anyone could be up there. The stairs were destroyed. Had been destroyed for years from the look of it. The wood was old, weathered. The breaks weren't fresh. They'd happened a long time ago and nobody had ever fixed them. But the footsteps kept going. Back and forth, back and forth. The sound clear and distinct coming through the door at the top of the ruined staircase. Ellie stood there for a long time. She was scared. She wasn't going to pretend she wasn't. 72 years old, and she'd seen enough of life to know that not everything has an explanation. Not everything fits into the neat little boxes we build for understanding the world. But she'd also taught teenagers for 4 decades. She'd learned something important in those years. Fear only runs your life if you let it sit in the driver's seat. If you let it make the decisions, if you give it power over what you do and don't do. She wasn't going to give it that power. Not tonight, not ever. She turned around and went back to bed. She didn't sleep, but she stayed. She lay there in the dark and listened to the footsteps, and she stayed. When morning came, she started searching, not for ghosts, not for explanations, for access. If there was a third floor, there was a way to reach it. Houses this old always had servant passages, back stairways, hidden routes designed so the help could move between floors without being seen by guests. In 1891, that would have been standard, essential even. The wealthy families who built houses like this didn't want to see the people who made their lives possible. They wanted the meals to appear, and the beds to be made, and the fires to be lit without ever having to acknowledge the human beings who did the work. So there would be a passage, a hidden stairway. Somewhere in the house there would be a way up. She just had to find it. She started on the second floor, knocked on every wall, opened every closet, pushed on every piece of paneling. Nothing. Just solid walls and empty closets and the dust of decades undisturbed. She moved down to the first floor. The kitchen, nothing. The dining room, nothing. The living room, nothing. The parlor, nothing. Then she reached the pantry. It was a narrow room off the kitchen lined with empty shelves. The kind of place where a cook would have stored dry goods and preserves and all the supplies needed to run a house this size. The walls were beadboard, same as the rest of the house, old and worn and stained with decades of dust. But when she knocked on the back wall, the sound was different. Hollow. Not hollow like there was nothing behind it. Hollow like there was space. A lot of space. She pushed on the boards and the whole panel shifted inward about half an inch. Her breath caught. She went back to her car and got the pry bar she kept in the trunk. Back into the pantry, she worked the panel loose, careful not to break it. It came away in one piece, revealing a narrow passage behind it, barely wide enough for her shoulders. Wooden walls, rough-cut cobwebs thick enough to feel like fabric against her face, and a staircase, steep and dark, spiraling upward into the house. This was it, the servants' passage, built so the staff could move between floors without being seen. In a house this size in 1891, that made sense. What didn't make sense was that nobody in 9 ownership changes had ever found it. The panel wasn't locked. It wasn't even hidden that well. Just a matter of knowing where to look. Or maybe they had found it. Maybe they'd found it and they'd seen what was on the other side and they'd closed it back up and walked away and never spoke of it again. Ellie turned on her flashlight and started climbing. The stairs were solid, dusty but solid. Old wood that had been built to last and had done its job for over a century. The cobwebs were thick. Nobody had been up here in a very long time. Her knees protested on every step, the ache from yesterday's fall flaring up with each movement. But she kept going, one flight up, then 2. She reached a door at the top, thick oak, heavy, a deadbolt that had rusted shut from disuse. She hit it with the pry bar once, twice. On the third strike, the bolt snapped, and the sound echoed down the passage behind her like a gunshot. The door swung inward. Now here's where the story stops making sense. And she meant that. What Ellie found on the other side of that door did not make sense. The rest of the house was destroyed. 9 years of vacancy, salt air creeping in through broken windows, water damage from leaky roofs, animals making nests in the walls. Every room she'd seen had been a wreck. Debris and rot, and the slow, patient work of decay. But the third floor wing was perfect. Not just intact, preserved. The hardwood floors were polished, gleaming in the light from her flashlight like someone had waxed them that morning. A writing desk sat by the window with papers stacked neatly on top. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with leather-bound volumes arranged by height. A bed was made with pressed white linens, not a wrinkle in sight. And there on the nightstand sat a glass of water. Clear, clean. No dust on the surface. No film of age or neglect, like someone had poured it that morning. Ellie stood in the doorway for a long time. The air was different up here. Still, warm, not the damp cold of the rest of the house. The smell was different too. The rest of the house smelled like decay. This room smelled like cedar and old paper and something else. Something that reminded her of Harold's workshop. That particular scent of a space where someone had spent a lot of time, where someone had lived and worked and thought about things that mattered to them. She stepped inside. Her footsteps were loud on the polished floor, the only sound in the room. No creaking boards, no settling house, just silence and her own breathing. She went to the writing desk first, papers stacked neatly, a pen lying beside them, the kind of fountain pen people used 50 years ago, and journals, dozens of them, leather-bound, dated, filled with a tight, careful hand, the handwriting of someone who thought about every word before putting it on the page. She picked up the first journal. The name on the inside cover was Dr. Walter Ashford. The dates ran from 1962 to 1971. She sat down in the chair and started reading. Walter Ashford had been a psychiatrist. She gathered that much from the first few pages. He'd bought Stone Ridge Manor in the summer of 1962, shortly after his daughter Elise died at 19 years old. Car accident, coming home from college for the summer. A truck ran a red light. She was dead before the ambulance arrived. The journal entries in those first months were brief, fractured, the writing of a man who was barely holding himself together. He'd moved to Stone Ridge because he couldn't bear to stay in his old house anymore. Every room reminded him of Elise. Every corner held a memory he couldn't face. But something changed in the fall of 1962. He started writing about the house itself, about the sounds he heard at night, about rooms that seemed colder than they should be even when the heat was running, about the feeling that he wasn't alone even when he was the only person in the building. He didn't call it haunted, he called it responsive. He developed a theory that sounded crazy when Ellie read it, but also sounded like something a man destroyed by grief might believe. He thought grief was not just an emotion. He thought it was a physical force, something that could be stored, redirected, preserved. He thought Stone Ridge could hold it. He thought the house had been built on a place where that force was stronger than normal, where the barrier between loss and presence was thinner. He thought he could use it to see his daughter again. The journals described his experiments. He'd invited patients to stay in the house, people who'd lost children, spouses, parents, people carrying grief so heavy they could barely function. He documented what they experienced, the strange sounds, the cold spots that moved through rooms, the feeling of someone standing behind you, the doors that opened on their own. 47 patients over 9 years. Most of them experienced minor things, sounds, feelings, the sense that something was there even when they couldn't see it. Unsettling but explainable. You could chalk it up to drafts and old hinges and a mind that wanted to find something. A mind that was looking so hard for the dead that it would see them anywhere. But 6 of them experienced something else entirely. They saw people, not ghosts, not transparent figures floating through walls. Real solid 3-dimensional people standing in rooms, sitting in chairs, looking out windows. People they had lost. A husband dead from a heart attack, standing by the fireplace where he used to read his evening paper. A daughter killed in an accident, sitting on the edge of the bed where her mother used to tuck her in. A mother taken by illness, standing at the kitchen window where she used to watch the birds. They appeared for seconds, sometimes minutes, and then they were gone, like they'd stepped out of the room and just not come back. Ashford couldn't explain it. He measured temperatures, air pressure, electromagnetic fields. He brought in equipment from the university where he'd once worked. Nothing unusual, not a single reading that was outside the range of normal. The house wasn't haunted in any way science could detect, but something was happening inside it, something science had no name for. Ellie read for hours. The light through the window changed from morning to afternoon. The ocean shifted colors outside, gray to blue to gray again. She barely noticed. She was lost in the words of a dead man, a man who'd spent 9 years trying to understand something that couldn't be understood. The last journal was dated November 1971. She opened it to the final entry. The handwriting was different here, shakier, the letters larger and less controlled, the writing of someone who was tired, someone who was reaching the end of something. I came to Stone Ridge to find Elise, he'd written. I was certain that if I stayed long enough, if I waited long enough, she would come to me the way the others came to my patients. I would see her one more time. I would tell her the things I never got to say. I would say goodbye. She never came. 9 years and she never came. Not once, not a glimpse, not a sound. Not even the feeling that she might be there just out of sight. I understand now. The house does not store grief. It answers it. And it chooses who it answers. It chose my patience. It did not choose me. Perhaps because I wanted it too much. Perhaps because I was trying to use it instead of simply being present with my loss. I'm leaving Stonebridge. I'm going back to the world. I'm going to live whatever years I have left, and I'm going to do it without knowing why some people see they're dead and others never do. But I'm leaving these journals here, in this room, in the one part of the house that stays intact no matter what happens to the rest. Perhaps someday someone will find them. Perhaps someone will understand what I could not. The house does not give back what we have lost. It gives us something else, the courage to survive the losing. Ellie closed the journal. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, from something else. Something she couldn't name but could feel deep in her chest pressing against her ribs like it wanted to get out. She looked around the room. Perfect, preserved, like no time had passed at all, like Ashford had just stepped out and would be back any moment. But he wasn't coming back. He'd left this place 53 years ago. He was probably dead by now. Most people from that generation were. And yet his room remained, his journals remained, his questions remained. And now she was here, 72 years old, no money, no family, no future to speak of, living in a house that nobody wanted because something inside it scared them so badly they couldn't stay. She thought about Harold. She thought about waking up next to his body, about the cold of his skin against her hand, about saying his name once quietly like she was disappointed in him. She'd never said goodbye. Not really. There was no time, no warning. He was just there one night and gone the next morning. 41 years of marriage, and it ended with her hand on his cold back in a single word spoken to no one. Oh, Carl. No, not Carl. That wasn't his name. Harold. Oh, Harold. She sat in that chair for a long time. The light changed again outside. Afternoon to evening. The ocean turned gold, then silver. The room stayed warm around her. The glass of water sat on the nightstand, still clear, still impossible. Finally, she stood up. She took one of the journals with her, the last one, the one with his final entry. She wanted to read it again. She wanted to understand what he meant, the courage to survive the losing. She went back down the hidden staircase through the pantry into the ruined kitchen. The contrast was jarring. Up there, everything was perfect. Down here, everything was falling apart. Two different houses in the same building. Two different realities coexisting in the same space. She went outside to the porch. The sun was setting. The ocean was on fire with it. Orange and red and gold spreading across the water like spilled paint. She sat on the porch steps, the ones that sagged but held her weight, and she watched the light fade. She was going to stay. She didn't know what was up there. She didn't know what Ashford had found or what his patients had seen or why this house had been empty for so long. But she was going to stay anyway, because she had nowhere else to go. And because maybe she wasn't done yet. Maybe there was something left for her, something she hadn't found yet, something the house wanted to show her. Or maybe she was just a crazy old woman who'd spent her last $250 on a ruin. Either way, she was home. That night, she went to bed early. She was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than physical tired. The kind that settles into your bones and makes everything feel heavy. She crawled into her sleeping bag on the mattress in the second-floor bedroom, and she closed her eyes. The house was quiet. No footsteps tonight. No sounds from the third floor. Just the ocean and the wind and the creaking of old wood settling into itself. She thought about Harold. She thought about the tomatoes in the garden, about the blue shutters, about the way he hummed when he worked on the lawnmowers. She thought about 41 years, and she thought about the 9 years since. 9 years of slowly falling. 9 years of losing everything except the one thing she couldn't lose. The memory of him. The weight of him. the empty space where he used to be. She fell asleep thinking about his hands, the way they looked when he was working, grease under the fingernails, calluses on the palms, hands that had held her face when they were young, hands that had grown old alongside her own. She fell asleep thinking about the last time she'd touched them. Cold skin, no response, no squeeze of her fingers, no humming from the garage, just silence, just the end of everything. She woke up once in the middle of the night, not to footsteps this time, to something else, a feeling, the feeling of being watched, of not being alone in the room. She opened her eyes. The moonlight was coming through the window, silvering everything it touched. The room was empty, just her and the mattress and her sleeping bag and the old walls of a house that had seen too much. But the feeling didn't go away. She lay there for a long time waiting, listening, feeling. Nothing happened. Eventually she closed her eyes again. Eventually she went back to sleep. And for the first time in months, she didn't dream about waking up next to a body that used to be her husband. She dreamed about the ocean instead, about waves hitting rocks, about salt spray on her face, about standing on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic and feeling for just a moment like everything might be okay, like she might survive this after all. When she woke up in the morning, the sun was coming through the window and the house was still standing and she was still alive. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The sound of a car door slamming woke her before dawn. Ellie sat up in her sleeping bag, heart already racing. The light through the window was gray, not quite morning, that thin hour between night and day when the world holds its breath. She went to the window. A black SUV was parked on the gravel loop out front. Expensive, the kind of vehicle that cost more than she'd made in 3 years of teaching. And a man was walking toward her front porch, moving with purpose, moving like he'd been here before. She pulled on her boots and got downstairs before he could knock. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch, blocking the entrance with her body. The man stopped at the bottom of the steps. He was about 50, clean-shaven, gray suit that fit too well to be off the rack, shoes that probably cost more than her car. He smiled at her, the kind of smile people wear when they're about to sell you something you don't want. "Mrs. Ellison," he said. "Brennan," she corrected. "And who's asking Victor Vance?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "Vance Properties." He held it out to her. She didn't take it. After a moment, he set it on the porch railing. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Brennan. I've been watching this property for a long time. Then you should have bid on it." His smile didn't change, didn't waver. The smile of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. The county had certain expectations about what would happen to this property after the auction. "We had an understanding." "That's not how auctions work," Ellie said. She kept her voice flat, neutral, the voice she'd used for 40 years when dealing with students who thought they could push her around. Vance looked past her into the house. His eyes moved over the collapsed ceiling, the rotting walls, the debris scattered across the floor. When he looked back at her, his expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had. Something that looked almost like hunger. "Mrs. Brennan, this property has over $90,000 in structural violations. The county can condemn it inside of 30 days. When they do, you lose the property and you're out your $250. Sounds like that's my problem." "It doesn't have to be." He took a step closer. His cologne reached her before he did. "Something expensive and sharp. I'll give you $10,000 right now, cash. You sign over the deed. You walk away with more money than you've had in a while. I'll handle the rest. And what are you going to do with it? Develop the land. The house comes down. The bluff is worth more than the building ever was." Ellie looked at him for a long moment. 38 years of teaching had given her certain skills. The ability to read a room. The ability to know when a student was lying about why their homework wasn't done. The ability to spot a con from across a crowded hallway. Marcus Vance wasn't just a developer. He knew something about this house. Something specific. And he wanted it gone. Not developed. Gone. Erased from existence like it had never been here at all. "No," she said. His smile dropped. First time his face showed anything real. Something dark moved behind his eyes. Something that might have been anger or might have been fear. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm trying to be generous here. This house will eat you alive. You're 70 years old living alone in a condemned building with no running water and no heat. How long do you think you can survive? That's 72, she corrected. And I've had worse roommates. This isn't a joke. His voice had changed, harder now. The salesman mask slipping. I know people at the county office. That inspection can happen fast. And once it does, you don't get a second chance. They board the place up with you outside. You lose everything. Ellie stepped closer to him. She was 5'4" and 120 pounds. Marcus Vance was a full head taller and probably outweighed her by 80 pounds. But she'd spent decades standing in front of classrooms full of teenagers who thought they could intimidate her. She'd faced down angry parents, hostile administrators, kids who were bigger and louder and meaner than this man would ever be. She looked up at him without blinking. Mr. Vance, I've been broke. I've been homeless. I've slept in a car in February in Maine. I buried my husband alone because we didn't have enough friends left to carry the coffin. There is nothing you can threaten me with that I haven't already survived. She let those words hang in the air between them. Now get off my porch. He stared at her. Something was happening behind his eyes. Some calculation, some weighing of options. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, might push harder, might try something stupid. But he didn't. He nodded once, slowly, like he was making a note of something. Then he turned and walked back to his SUV. He got in, started the engine, but he didn't drive away. He sat there for a long time, engine idling, just sitting there staring up at the third floor, at those boarded windows, at the part of the house that nobody could reach from the outside. Ellie watched from the porch until his taillights disappeared down the coast road. Then she went back inside. The inspection happened 3 days later. Vance brought the inspector himself, a young man with a clipboard and a county badge who walked through the first floor, making notes about every code violation he could find. He didn't look at Ellie, didn't speak to her, just wrote on his clipboard and moved from room to room like she wasn't even there. Structural failure in the foyer, exposed wiring in the kitchen, no running water, hazardous materials in the paint, lead probably, maybe asbestos in the insulation. The list went on for 3 pages. When he was done, he handed her a copy. You've got 30 days, he said. After that, the county condemns the structure and you vacate. His voice was flat, rehearsed, like he'd said these words 100 times before. I'm sorry, ma'am. Vance stood behind him, smiling again. That same salesman's smile, that same hungry look in his eyes. My offer still stands, Mrs. Brennan. $10,000. You can rent a nice apartment somewhere. Live out your days in comfort. Ellie looked at the inspector. I'd like another copy of that report, she said. Ma'am, the building is dangerous. You shouldn't be here. I didn't ask if it was dangerous. I asked for another copy. She got it. That night, she sat on the porch and read every line, every violation, every code, every requirement that had to be met before the county would consider the property habitable. The list was long. The repairs would be expensive. She had no money, no skills, no way to fix any of this on her own. But she had something else, something that mattered more in a small town in Maine than money ever could. She had 38 years of showing up, 38 years of teaching other people's children, of staying late for tutoring sessions, of writing college recommendation letters, of attending every single graduation every single year, standing in the back of the auditorium in her good dress and watching kids she'd taught walk across that stage. She had credibility, and she was about to cash it in. The next morning, Ellie drove into town. First stop was the hardware store on Main Street, Whitmore's. Been there since 1952. The sign out front was faded, the parking lot cracked, but the shelves inside were full, and the prices were fair. The man behind the counter was in his mid-40s, thinning hair, thick hands, the kind of hands that had spent decades working with tools. Russell Whitmore. She'd taught him sophomore English in 1993. He'd been a quiet kid, sat in the middle of the room and did his work without complaint. Not brilliant, but solid, reliable. The kind of student who showed up every day and gave you exactly what you asked for. Mrs. Brennan. He recognized her immediately. Of course he did, 30 years later, and he still remembered. That was the thing about teaching. You touched more lives than you ever knew. You planted seeds that you never got to see grow. Russell, she nodded at him. I need some supplies. She handed him the inspection report. He read it slowly. His face didn't change, but his eyes did. Something shifted in them, something that looked like determination. This is a lot, he said. I know, the house out on the bluff, Stone Ridge, that's the one. He set the paper down on the counter, looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Brennan, that house has been empty since before I was born. My grandfather used to tell stories about it. Said it wasn't right, said something was wrong with the place. Something is wrong with it, Ellie said. The foundation's good, but the rest is falling apart. I've got 30 days to fix it, or I lose everything. Russell nodded slowly. What do you need? Everything on that list, whatever you can spare. He picked up the paper again. Read through the violations one more time. Then he set it down and looked at her. Cost, he said. She didn't flinch. I can't pay cost. Not right now, but I'm good for it. You know I am. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. The first real smile she'd seen since Marcus Vance showed up on her porch. Mrs. Brennan, you wrote me a letter, senior year. You told the admissions office at Portland State that I was one of the most reliable students you'd ever taught. You said I had integrity. I remember, I got in because of that letter. First person in my family to go to college. Changed my whole life. He pulled out a pad of paper and started writing. I'll get you everything you need, he said. Cost. Pay me when you can. She left the hardware store with a list of supplies that would be delivered the next day. Next stop was the diner, Caldwell's. Been on the same corner since 1965. Blue vinyl booths and a counter with chrome stools and coffee that tasted exactly the way diner coffee was supposed to taste. The woman behind the counter was in her early 50s, gray streaking through dark hair, strong hands, the kind of face that had seen a lot of life and wasn't done yet. Lorraine Caldwell, class of 1987. She'd been one of the smart ones. The ones who could have gone anywhere, done anything, but chose to stay. Chose to take over the family business. Chose to be part of the community instead of leaving it behind. Mrs. Brennan. Her face lit up when Ellie walked in. My God, it's been years. Sit down. Let me get you some coffee. Ellie sat at the counter. The coffee came fast, hot and strong and exactly what she needed. I heard you bought that place, Lorraine said. The one out on the bluff? Word travels fast. Small town. Lorraine leaned against the counter. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. What do you need, Ellie told her. About the inspection, about the 30 days, about Marcus Vance and his offers and his threats. Lorraine listened without interrupting. When Ellie was done, she nodded slowly. That man came in here about a month ago, she said, before the auction. He was asking questions about the property, about who might be interested in buying it, about who in town might cause problems if he tried to develop it. What did you tell him? She smiled, that thin smile of a woman who didn't suffer fools. I told him to order something or get out of my diner. Ellie laughed. First time she'd laughed in weeks. What do you need? Lorraine asked again. People, Ellie said. I need people who can work, who can swing hammers and patch roofs and fix what's broken. I can't pay them. Not now, maybe not ever. But I need them anyway. Lorraine was quiet for a moment. You know, she said, finally you taught a lot of people in this town. A lot of people who remember you, who remember what you did for them. She pulled out her phone. Let me make some calls. By the end of the day, Ellie had 17 volunteers. They showed up at Stone Ridge the next morning in pickup trucks, in work vans carrying tools and supplies, and the kind of determination that money can't buy. Russ Whitmore brought lumber and nails and 3 of his employees who'd offered to work on their day off. Lorraine Caldwell brought food, sandwiches and coffee, and a cooler full of cold drinks. She set up a table on the porch and kept everyone fed throughout the day. Garrett Walsh showed up in an old pickup truck with rust along the wheel wells. He was 60 years old, semi-retired, doing electrical work freelance now. Ellie had taught him in 1979. He'd been headed for trouble back then. Angry kid with a chip on his shoulder and parents who didn't know what to do with him. She'd convinced them to let him take shop class instead of dropping out. It saved his life. He told her that once years later, ran into her at the grocery store and said those exact words. Mrs. Brennan, you saved my life. Now he was here, standing on her porch with a tool belt around his waist and his nephew beside him. "Heard you needed an electrician," he said. She did. They worked. The first day they shored up the first floor, replaced the worst of the rotting boards, patched the holes that would have let in wind and rain and animals. The second day they moved to the windows, replaced broken glass, resealed frames, made the house tight against the elements. The third day they started on the roof. Ellie worked alongside them when she could. Her knees ached, her back complained. She couldn't do the heavy lifting or the climbing, but she could hand tools to people who needed them, could hold boards in place while others nailed, could make coffee and keep track of what still needed doing. Someone brought an American flag and hung it off the porch railing. Nobody took it down. At the end of each day, Ellie sat on the porch and watched the volunteers drive away, their taillights disappearing down the coast road one by one. And she thought about what this meant, what it really meant. She'd spent 38 years giving to this community. Now the community was giving back. At night, after everyone was gone, she went up to the third floor. The hidden passage was hers now, her secret. She hadn't told anyone about it, hadn't shown anyone the room at the top or the journal she'd found there. She sat at Ashford's desk and read by lamplight, read deeper into his journals, deeper into his research, deeper into the mystery of this house, the 47 patients. She read about them one by one, their names, their losses, their experiences in this house. Most of them had minor encounters, sounds in the night, doors that opened on their own, the feeling of being watched. Unsettling, but nothing that couldn't be explained away. Nothing that would make a rational person believe in something beyond the physical world. But 6 of them. 6 of them saw things that couldn't be explained. Margaret Hollister, whose son had drowned at age 12. She stayed at Stonebridge for 3 weeks in the summer of 1964. On the 15th night, she saw him standing at the foot of her bed, wet hair plastered to his forehead, that same smile he'd had in every photograph. He didn't speak, he just looked at her, and then he was gone. Thomas Everett, whose wife had died in childbirth along with the baby. He stayed for 2 months in 1966. One morning he came downstairs and found them both in the kitchen, his wife holding the baby she'd never gotten to hold, both of them looking at him like they had something to say, both of them gone before he could ask what it was. And the others, 4 more, each with their own story, their own loss, their own moment of impossible contact. But here's what Ashford noticed. Here's what he documented with careful precision. All 6 of them refused to leave afterward. They stayed, refused to eat, refused to sleep, sat in the rooms where they'd seen their loved ones and waited for them to come back, waited for another moment and another glimpse and another impossible second of presence. They had to be removed by force. Family members came, doctors came. In one case, the police. They were carried out of the house screaming and crying and begging to be allowed to stay. The house didn't trap them. Their own grief did. The house just gave the grief a place to show itself, a form to take. And once it had shown itself, once they had seen what they'd lost, they couldn't bear to leave. Couldn't bear to walk away from the place where the impossible had happened. Ellie closed the journal. The room was quiet around her. The only sound was the ocean outside, constant and eternal. She understood something now. She understood why every owner had left, why the families had fled in the middle of the night, why people called this house wrong. It wasn't haunted, not in the way people usually meant that word. It was something else, something that gave people exactly what they wanted most, and then made it impossible for them to ever be satisfied again. She went to bed thinking about that, thinking about Margaret Hollister and Thomas Everett and the others, thinking about what it would be like to see Harold again. Just for a moment, just long enough to say the things she'd never said. Would she be able to walk away? Would she be able to leave this house if it gave her that? She didn't know, and that scared her more than anything Vance had threatened. The days blurred together, work and more work. The volunteers kept coming, word spread through the town. People she didn't even recognize showed up with tools and supplies and offers to help. A plumber named Danny Sullivan fixed the pipes and got the water running. Wouldn't take a dime for his labor. His mother had been one of Ellie's colleagues at the high school. They'd worked together for 15 years. A roofer named Pete Gallagher patched the worst sections of the roof. His son had been in Ellie's class. class of 1999. She'd written him a recommendation letter for trade school. A carpenter named William Foster replaced the porch boards. His daughter had struggled with reading. Ellie had stayed late with her twice a week for an entire year. Now she was a librarian in Boston, on and on. Every person with a story, every helper with a connection. 38 years of teaching, 38 years of showing up. And now it was coming back to her in ways she never expected. Day 14, day 20, day 25. The house was coming together. Not perfect, not finished, but livable. The first floor was solid now. The second floor was safe. The windows were tight. The roof didn't leak. The electricity worked. The water ran. Ellie stood on the porch in the fading light and looked at what they'd built. Not just a house, a testament to community, to connection, to the simple truth that what you give to the world comes back to you eventually in ways you can't predict. That night she went up to the third floor. The room was the same as always. Perfect, preserved. The desk with its stack of papers. The bookshelves with their leather-bound volumes. The bed with its pressed white linens. And the glass of water on the nightstand. Still clear, still impossible. She sat at the desk and opened a journal she hadn't read yet. One from 1968. The middle of Ashford's time here, the height of his research. She read for an hour, and then she looked up. The room felt different. Not wrong, not threatening, just different. The air had changed somehow. The quality of the silence had shifted. Like someone had entered the room without making a sound. She felt it before she saw it. A warmth. Not temperature. Presence. The way a room feels different when someone else is in it. The way you know without looking that you're not alone. She turned toward the window. Harold was standing there. Her husband. Not young, not old, just Harold. The way he'd looked in those last good years. Before the weight loss started. Before the tiredness that turned out to be his heart slowly failing. Before everything changed and then ended. He was wearing his green flannel shirt. The one with the paint stain on the cuff. She remembered that stain. Remembered the day he'd gotten it. They'd been repainting the kitchen. He'd gotten more paint on himself than on the walls, and she'd laughed at him, and he'd kissed her with paint still on his hands and left fingerprints on her face. 20 years ago. More than 20. She'd washed that shirt 100 times since then, and the stain never came out. He was standing by the window with the moonlight behind him, looking at her, and the expression on his face was not sadness, not longing, not any of the things she might have expected. It was patience, the patient look of a man who had been waiting a long time and wasn't in any rush now that the waiting was over. She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She sat there and looked at her dead husband standing in a patch of moonlight, and everything she'd pushed down for 9 years came rising up through her chest. Every morning she'd woken up alone. Every night she'd reached across the bed and found nothing. Every holiday, every anniversary, every ordinary Tuesday when she'd wanted to tell him something and remembered again that she couldn't. Every time someone had said, "You're so strong," and she'd wanted to scream that she wasn't strong, she was just too tired to cry anymore. 9 years. 9 years of carrying it alone, and now here he was, standing in the moonlight, looking at her with patience and love and something else. Pride. He was proud of her. She could see it in his face, in the way he stood, in the slight curve of his lips that wasn't quite a smile but was close. He was proud of her for surviving. She opened her mouth to say something. His name. "I love you. I miss you. Don't go. Stay. Please stay." But he was already fading. Not disappearing, fading. Like the moonlight was slowly reclaiming him. Like he was made of something thinner than air, and the world was taking him back. He was gone in less than a minute. The moonlight was just moonlight. The room was empty. The warmth was gone. Ellie sat there for a long time. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her heart was beating fast. Her eyes were dry. The tears would come later, in the dark in her sleeping bag when she finally let herself feel all of it. But for now, she just sat there. And she understood. She understood why every owner had left. Why the ones who saw things couldn't stop coming back. Why this house had been empty for so long. She also understood what Marcus Vance wanted. He didn't want the bluff. He didn't want to develop the land. He wanted the house gone. Because someone, maybe Vance himself, had seen something inside Stoneridge that they couldn't explain. Something that terrified them. Something that made them want to erase this place from existence. What people can't explain, they destroy. But Ellie wasn't going to let that happen. Not now, not after what she'd seen. Not after Harold. Day 28. The inspector came back. Same young man, same clipboard, same county badge. But this time Vance was standing beside him, arms crossed, face tight with barely concealed anger. They walked through the first floor. The inspector checked every item on his list, every violation, every code, every requirement. Structural integrity. Pass. Electrical systems. Pass. Plumbing. Pass. Roof. Pass. Windows. Pass. On and on. He went through all 3 pages of violations and he couldn't check a single box. Every problem had been fixed. Every danger had been addressed. The house was safe, livable, up to code. The inspector looked at Vance. Something passed between them. Some unspoken communication. Then the inspector shrugged and turned to Ellie. Congratulations, Mrs. Brennan. The property meets minimum safety standards. The condemnation order is lifted. He handed her a document. Official. Stamped. Signed. She'd won. Vance stood beside his black SUV with his arms crossed and his face dark. He didn't say anything. Didn't congratulate her. Didn't make another offer. Just stared at her with those hungry eyes. Then he got in his car and drove away. That night, the volunteers gathered on the porch. Russ Whitmore and Lorraine Caldwell and Garrett Walsh and all the others. They'd brought food and drinks and a sense of celebration that Ellie hadn't felt in years. They'd done it. Together. They'd saved the house. Ellie stood among them and accepted their congratulations and their hugs and their well wishes. She smiled and nodded and said thank you so many times she lost count. But part of her was somewhere else. Part of her was still in that room on the 3rd floor. Still seeing Harold in the moonlight. Still hearing the silence after he was gone. She could stop now. She'd won. She had her house. She could seal off the 3rd floor and live out her days in peace. She could pretend that what she'd seen was a dream or a hallucination or a trick of the light. She could tell herself that there was nothing up there, nothing special, nothing that mattered. But she knew that wasn't true. She knew the house wasn't finished with her. After everyone left, she went upstairs, through the pantry, up the hidden staircase, through the door at the top. The room was different. The desk was gone. In its place was a long table. And on the table were photographs, not from the journals, not from Ashford's time. These were new, recent. Photographs of people she knew. Russ Whitmore, his face tired and sad. She remembered what Lorraine had mentioned once. Russ's wife had died of cancer 2 years ago. He never talked about it, never showed weakness, just kept working, kept running his store, kept putting one foot in front of the other. Lorraine Caldwell, her face carrying something heavy, her son. Ellie remembered now. She'd read about it in the paper years ago. He'd been killed overseas. Military, 23 years old. Lorraine had closed the diner for a week, and when she opened it again, she never mentioned him. Garrett Walsh, his face lined with regret. His daughter hadn't spoken to him in 15 years. Some falling out, some breach that had never been healed. He mentioned it once years ago when Ellie ran into him at the grocery store. Said he had a daughter he never saw. Said he didn't know how to fix it. 3 photographs. 3 people carrying grief they couldn't put down. 3 people who had helped her save this house. Ellie looked at those photographs for a long time. The house was showing her something. It was telling her what it wanted. Not to be owned, not to be studied, not to be destroyed. It wanted to be opened. It wanted to do for others what it had done for her. It wanted to give people the chance to say goodbye. The next morning, Vance came back. This time he had 2 lawyers with him. Dark suits, leather briefcases, the whole performance. They stood on her porch with documents in hand. Official looking. Lots of signatures. Lots of stamps. These papers show that Vance Properties had a prior agreement with the county, the first lawyer said. A right of first refusal on this property dating back 3 years. If this agreement is valid, the sale to you would be voided. Mr. Vance would be able to purchase Stonebridge for the assessed land value. The second lawyer smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We're prepared to be generous, Mrs. Brennan. $20,000 to walk away. That's twice what Mr. Vance offered before. You can start over somewhere comfortable. Ellie took the documents. She read through them slowly, taking her time, making them wait. When she was finished, she handed them back. These need to be reviewed by an attorney, she said. I'll be in touch. The lawyers exchanged glances, something they hadn't expected. Mrs. Brennan, we're offering you a fair deal. The first lawyer leaned closer. If this goes to court, it could take years, years you might not have. I've got more time than you think. She stepped back and closed the door in their faces. That night, she made phone calls, 3 of them, to 3 former students who had gone to law school. Colleen Mercer, class of 1996, smart as a whip, had argued with Ellie about everything from Shakespeare to semicolons. Now she practiced civil litigation in Portland. Douglas Sinclair, class of 1994. Quiet kid who'd found his voice in college, specialized in real estate disputes. His office was 20 minutes from Stonebridge. Vivian Pratt, class of 1989, the first person in her family to become a lawyer. She'd sent Ellie a thank you note after passing the bar. Still practiced real estate law in Bangor. She called all 3. She explained the situation. She asked for help, and all 3 said yes. They picked Vance's paperwork apart in a week. The claim was fabricated. The county official who had allegedly signed the agreement had retired 2 years before the date on the document. His signature had been forged. The witnesses listed didn't exist. The whole thing was a fraud. Vivian Pratt filed a complaint with the state bar against Vance's attorneys. Douglas Sinclair sent a cease and desist letter that was 6 pages long and used the word fraudulent 11 times. Colleen Mercer called Ellie to deliver the news. He's done, she said. The paperwork was fake. His lawyers are looking at disciplinary action. He's not coming back. And he didn't. The black SUV never appeared on the coast road again. Marcus Vance disappeared from Stonebridge like he'd never been there at all. That night, Ellie went up to the 3rd floor. The photographs were still on the table. Russ, Lorraine, Garrett, 3 people carrying burdens they couldn't put down. She stood there for a long time looking at those faces. The house had given her something impossible. A moment with Harold, a chance to see him one more time, a gift that couldn't be explained by science or logic or anything rational. It wanted to give that gift to others. But Ashford had tried that. He'd brought patients here. He'd let them experience whatever the house could show them, and it had destroyed them. They'd seen what they'd lost and they couldn't leave. They'd glimpsed the impossible, and they couldn't go back to the possible. They'd tasted a moment of reunion, and they'd starved themselves trying to taste it again. Ashford had failed because he treated the house like a laboratory. He brought people in and watched what happened, documented their experiences, measured their responses, but he never guided them, never prepared them, never told them that what the house gives you isn't a second chance. It's a goodbye, a real one, the kind most people never get, the kind Ellie had never gotten with Harold. Until now. That's what the house had shown her. Not Harold as he was, not Harold as she remembered him, Harold as he wanted to be remembered. Standing in moonlight, patient, proud, telling her without words that she'd done enough, that she could stop carrying the weight, that she could let go. And she was ready now, not to hold on, to let go. That was the difference. That was what Ashford had never understood. The house didn't trap people with grief. Grief trapped people. The house just gave you a choice. Hold on forever, or say goodbye and keep living. Ellie looked at those 3 photographs one more time. Then she went downstairs. She had work to do. The next Saturday, Ellie invited Russ Whitmore to the house. She called him on a Thursday evening, kept it simple, said she wanted to thank him properly for everything he'd done, said she had something to show him, something she thought he might need to see. He arrived at 10 in the morning. His pickup truck pulled into the gravel loop, and he sat there for a moment before getting out, looking up at the house, looking at the 3rd floor with its window that were no longer boarded shut. She'd opened them the week before. Let the light in, let the air circulate through rooms that had been sealed for decades. The house looked different now. Still old, still weathered, but alive. The porch didn't sag anymore. The windows reflected the morning sun. The American flag still hung from the railing, snapping in the ocean breeze. Russ got out of his truck and walked up the steps. He was carrying a paper bag from his store. More supplies, more things he thought she might need. Even now, even after everything, he was still trying to help. Mrs. Brennan, Russ, come inside. She led him through the first floor, through the foyer that no longer had a hole in it, through the hallway with its restored walls and polished floors, past the kitchen where water now ran from the tap and the stove actually worked. He looked around as they walked, taking it in, seeing what all those weeks of work had accomplished. Place looks good, he said. It's getting there. She led him to the pantry. He looked at her with confusion. The narrow room with its empty shelves, the beadboard walls, nothing special about it. Nothing that would explain why she'd brought him here. Then she pushed on the back wall and the panel swung inward. His face changed, surprise first, then curiosity, then something else, something that looked almost like recognition, like he'd always known there was something hidden in this house, and here it was. "What is this?" "Come with me," she said. "There's something I need to show you." They climbed the hidden staircase together. His footsteps were heavy behind her. The stairs creaked under their combined weight but held firm. They'd been built to last, these stairs. Built by people who understood that some things need to survive. At the top, she opened the door. The room was exactly as it had been. Perfect, preserved. The desk back in its place, now the photographs gone. The bookshelves with their leather-bound volumes. The bed with its pressed white linens. The glass of water on the nightstand, clear and impossible. Russ stood in the doorway. He didn't speak for a long time. How he finally said, "The rest of the house was destroyed." "How is this possible?" "I don't know," Ellie said. "But I know what it does." She told him. She told him about Dr. Walter Ashford, about the journals, about the 47 patients and the 6 who saw things that couldn't be explained. She told him about the footsteps she'd heard that first night, about the feeling of being watched, about the house that had been called wrong by everyone who'd ever lived in it. And she told him about Harold, about seeing her husband standing by the window in moonlight, about the green flannel shirt with the paint stain, about the look on his face, patient, proud, ready to let go. Russ listened without interrupting. When she was done, he was quiet for a long time. His hands were in his pockets. His face was hard to read. "Margaret," he finally said. She waited. "My wife. Her name was Margaret. I know. She died 2 years ago. Cancer. Took 8 months from diagnosis to the end. 8 months of watching her disappear. 8 months of holding her hand while she got smaller and smaller, and there was nothing I could do." Ellie nodded. "I never got to say goodbye." "Not really. The last time she was conscious, she didn't know who I was. The disease had taken that too. She looked at me like I was a stranger, called me by her brother's name. He's been dead for 20 years. His voice cracked on the last word. "She didn't know me at the end. Didn't know I was there. Didn't know how much I loved her. I sat beside her bed for 3 days after she stopped recognizing me, and she never came back. Never looked at me one more time with those eyes that knew who I was." Ellie reached out and took his hand. "I don't know if the house will show you anything," she said. "It doesn't work for everyone. Ashford documented that. Some people sit up here for hours and nothing happens. The house chooses who it answers. I can't explain why or how. But if it does show you something, if you see her, you need to understand something first. She's not coming back. Whatever you see, whatever moment you get, it's not a door that opens. It's not a way to bring her back or keep her here. It's a goodbye. A real one, the kind most people never get. You can stay up here as long as you want. I'll be downstairs. When you're ready to leave, come find me." She let go of his hand. "The house doesn't owe you anything, Russ, and neither does Margaret. Whatever happens or doesn't happen, you're going to be okay. I promise you that." She left him there, closed the door behind her, went downstairs and sat on the porch and waited. 2 hours. He was up there for 2 hours. The sun moved across the sky. The shadows shifted. The ocean changed colors, blue to green, to something darker as clouds moved in from the east. Ellie sat on the porch with a cup of tea and she waited. She thought about Ashford, about his patience, about the six who saw their loved ones and couldn't leave afterward. That was the danger. That was what had destroyed them. They'd been given a moment of impossible grace, and they'd tried to hold on to it. They'd tried to turn a goodbye into a beginning. They'd refused to accept that some doors only open once. Ashford had watched it happen, documented it, but he'd never understood it. He'd never understood that the gift wasn't the seeing. The gift was the letting go. The door at the end of the hidden staircase opened. She heard his footsteps coming down. Slow, careful. The footsteps of someone who was carrying something heavy and trying not to drop it. He emerged from the pantry. His eyes were red. His face was wet. He'd been crying. Maybe was still crying, hard to tell in the dim light of the kitchen. He didn't say anything. He walked straight to her and pulled her into a hug, held on tight. The kind of hug that says everything words can't. The kind of hug that breaks you open and puts you back together at the same time. They stood there for a long time. The ocean was loud outside. The wind was picking up. Somewhere a seagull cried out lonely and far away. Finally, he let go. He stepped back, wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a breath that shook on the way in. She was there, he said, by the window. Same place you said, same moonlight. Ellie nodded. She looked at me, really looked at me, with her eyes, her real eyes, the ones that knew who I was. His voice broke again. She smiled at me, Mrs. Brennan. That smile she had, the one that always made me feel like the luckiest man in the world. She smiled at me, and then she was gone. He took another breath. It wasn't enough. Part of me wanted more, wanted to chase it, wanted to sit up there forever and wait for her to come back. But I didn't, because you were right. That wasn't a door opening. That was a goodbye. The goodbye I never got. The one she would have given me if the disease hadn't taken it away. He looked at her with something new in his eyes, something that hadn't been there when he'd arrived that morning. Thank you, he said. Those two words, simple, heavy, full of everything he couldn't say and didn't need to. Then he walked out to his truck, got in, sat there for a long time looking at the ocean, and finally drove away. The next day his daughter called Ellie. Her name was Patricia. She lived 2 towns over with her husband and their 3 kids. She'd been worried about her father for 2 years. Worried about the way he worked too much. Worried about the way he never talked about her mother. Worried about the silence that had settled over him like a second skin. Mrs. Brennan, she said, I don't know what you did, but my dad came home last night and cooked dinner. First time since Mom died. He made her recipe, the pot roast she used to make on Sundays. Ellie listened. He set 2 places at the table. Out of habit, I guess. And then he caught himself, realized what he'd done, looked at that empty plate across from him. And he laughed. Patricia's voice cracked. He laughed, Mrs. Brennan. Not a sad laugh, a real one. Like he'd remembered something funny instead of something painful. I don't know what happened out there at that house. He won't tell me. But whatever it was, something changed, something shifted. He's not better exactly. But he's different. Lighter, maybe. Like he finally put down something he'd been carrying for too long. Ellie closed her eyes. Thank you, Patricia said. I don't know how to thank you enough. You just did. She hung up the phone, stood there in the kitchen of her impossible house, and smiled. Lorraine Caldwell came the following week. Ellie didn't ask her, didn't invite her, didn't explain anything in advance. Lorraine just showed up. Her car pulled into the gravel loop on a Tuesday afternoon. She got out and walked up the porch steps like she'd been planning to do this for a long time and had finally worked up the courage. You knew I'd come, she said. I hoped. Russ told me. Not everything, just enough. Said you had something up there that helped him. Said I should talk to you. Ellie led her inside. They sat in the living room. The furniture had been uncovered, the windows cleaned. The fireplace still didn't work, but the room was warm enough without it. Late spring in Maine, the ocean through the windows was the color of steel. My son Lorraine said. His name was Daniel. He died overseas 8 years ago. He was 23. Ellie waited. I don't talk about it. Don't know how to talk about it. People tried to help at first. Brought food. Said they were sorry. Told me he was a hero. She laughed. A sharp sound with no humor in it. A hero. Like that's supposed to make it better. like knowing he died for something is supposed to fill the hole in my chest where he used to be. She looked out the window. I closed the diner for a week after I got the news, sat in my apartment and stared at the wall and tried to figure out how I was supposed to keep breathing, how I was supposed to get up the next day and the day after that and all the days after that forever without him. I never figured it out. I just did it. One day at a time, one breath at a time, put one foot in front of the other and kept moving because stopping meant dying and I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. She turned back to Ellie, but I never said goodbye. Never got the chance. They sent his body home in a box with a flag on it. I couldn't look, couldn't open it, couldn't see what was left of the boy I'd raised. I buried a closed casket, and I've been carrying that weight ever since. Ellie reached across and took her hand. Come with me. They went upstairs together. Lorraine was quiet as they climbed, quiet as Ellie opened the door, quiet as she stepped into the room that shouldn't exist, the room that had stayed perfect while the rest of the house fell apart. She looked around. Her face was unreadable. How long should I stay? She asked. As long as you need. What if nothing happens? Then nothing happens. And you go home. And life goes on. The house doesn't owe you anything, Lorraine. And neither does Daniel. Whatever you get or don't get, you're going to be okay. Lorraine nodded slowly, sat down in the chair by the desk, closed her eyes. Ellie left. She went downstairs and out to the garden she'd started planting. Tomatoes mostly. It was what she knew. Stakes and string and careful pruning. The soil here was different than the soil at her old house. Sandier, saltier, but the tomatoes were growing anyway, life finding a way even in unexpected places. She worked for hours, lost track of time. The sun moved, the shadows stretched. The ocean kept its endless rhythm waves hitting rocks the same sound it had made for 1,000,000 years. When she looked up, Lorraine was standing on the porch. Her face was different. Not happy. That wasn't the right word. Not healed. That was too simple, too clean for what had happened. But settled, like something that had been out of place had finally clicked into position. Like a weight that had been crushing her had been lifted just enough for her to breathe. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard to where Ellie was kneeling in the dirt. He was beautiful, she said, the way he looked when he was a boy, before the war, before everything. He was standing right there in that room looking at me with those eyes. Those same eyes he had when he was 5 years old and would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. She knelt down beside Ellie. I've been so angry, she said. 8 years of angry. At the war, at the government, at God, at everyone and everything that took him from me. I carried that anger like a shield. Like if I let go of it, I'd have to feel all the other things underneath. She picked up a handful of soil, let it run through her fingers. He wasn't angry, standing there in that room. He wasn't sad or hurt or any of the things I've been imagining all these years. He was just there, present, looking at me like he wanted me to know something. What? That it was okay, that he was okay, that I could let go. She looked at Ellie with tears running down her face. I'm not ready to let go. Not completely, but I can start now. I can finally start. She stood up, brushed the dirt off her knees, looked out at the ocean. Thank you, she said. Then she walked to her car and drove away. Garrett Walsh was the hardest one. He didn't come on his own. Ellie had to call him, had to convince him, had to explain 3 times before he finally agreed to drive out to Stone Ridge. He arrived on a Saturday morning looking like he hadn't slept in days. I don't know why I'm here, he said, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets. Whatever you've got up there, it's not going to help me. Why not? Because the person I lost isn't dead. She's just gone. Ellie led him inside. They sat in the kitchen. She made coffee, strong the way he liked it. He wrapped his hands around the mug and stared into the steam. My daughter, he said. Her name is Jennifer. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. What happened? Everything. He took a sip of his coffee. Her mother and I divorced when Jennifer was 12. Ugly divorce. The kind where nobody wins and everyone gets hurt. Jennifer got caught in the middle. Had to choose sides. Chose her mother. I understood. I did. Her mother was there every day. I was working all the time, trying to provide, trying to be a good father in the only way I knew how. But I wasn't there, not really. And when the divorce happened, Jennifer saw that, saw all the times I'd put work first, saw all the ways I'd failed her mother. He set down the mug. She stopped talking to me when she was 15. Just stopped. No warning, no explanation. One day we were fine, or at least I thought we were fine, and the next day she wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't see me, wouldn't acknowledge that I existed. 15 years ago, 15 years since I heard her voice, 15 years since I saw her face except in photographs, 15 years of sending letters that never get answered and birthday cards that never get acknowledged and Christmas presents that get returned unopened. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. She's alive. She's living 3 towns over. Married, has kids of her own. I have grandchildren I've never met. A whole family that doesn't know I exist. That's not grief, Mrs. Brennan. That's something else, something worse. Because at least when someone dies, you know it's over. You know there's nothing more you can do, but this is knowing that every single day she makes the choice not to forgive me. Every single day she decides again that I'm not worth knowing. Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something she hadn't planned to say. The house doesn't just show you the dead. He looked up. Ashford documented 47 patients. 6 of them saw people they'd lost. But the loss wasn't always death. One man saw his brother. They'd had a falling out 20 years earlier. The brother was still alive, living in another state. But the relationship was dead. The connection was dead. And the house showed him that loss the same way it showed the others they're dead. Garrett stared at her. You're saying I might see Jennifer. I'm saying I don't know what you'll see. I'm saying the house chooses. I'm saying that if there's a loss, you're carrying a goodbye. You never got to say the house might give you the chance to say it. Even if the person is still alive. Even if the relationship can still be healed. She leaned forward. But here's what I need you to understand, Garrett. Whatever you see up there, it's not going to fix anything. It's not going to make Jennifer forgive you. It's not going to bring her back into your life. The only thing it might do is help you let go. Let go of the guilt. Let go of the regret. Let go of the weight you've been carrying for 15 years. And then maybe you can try again. Not because you expect it to work, because you're finally free enough to take the risk. He sat there for a long time. The coffee got cold. The morning turned to afternoon. Finally, he stood up. Show me. She took him upstairs. He was only up there for 40 minutes. When he came down, his face was wet and his eyes were clear, and he didn't say a word. He walked straight out to his truck, got in, started the engine, and drove away. Not toward home, toward his daughter's apartment 3 towns over. He got there in less than an hour, parked on the street outside her building, sat there for a long time looking up at her windows. He couldn't bring himself to knock, couldn't face the possibility of having a door closed in his face. So he wrote a letter instead, right there in his truck. On the back of an envelope he found in the glove compartment, 4 pages of small, cramped handwriting. Everything he'd wanted to say for 15 years. Every apology he owed her. Every regret he'd carried. He walked up to her door, put the letter on the mat, and walked away. 3 days later, his phone rang. The number on the screen was one he hadn't seen in 15 years. His hands were shaking when he answered. Dad, Jennifer. Yeah, it's me. Silence on the line, both of them breathing, both of them afraid to break it. I got your letter, she said. More silence. I'm not ready to forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to talk. That's all he needed to hear. That was everything. Word spread through the town, not fast, not loud, not the kind of spreading that involves newspaper articles or social media posts. This was different. This was the old way, person to person, whispered in diners and mentioned after church and hinted at in hardware store conversations. Something was happening at the old house on the bluff, something that helped people. They started coming. Not many at first, just a few. People who'd heard something from Russ or Lorraine or Garrett. People who were carrying losses they couldn't put down. People who were desperate enough to try something they didn't understand. Ellie met with each one, sat with them before they went upstairs, explained what might happen, explained that nothing might happen, explained that the house didn't owe them anything and neither did the people they'd lost. She never made promises. She never guaranteed anything. She just opened the door and let them walk through it. Some of them saw things. A woman named Helen who'd lost her mother to Alzheimer's. She spent 3 hours in the third-floor room and came down with a peace she hadn't felt in years. A man named Robert, whose wife had died in a car accident. He saw her standing by the window whole and unbroken, smiling at him the way she used to smile on Sunday mornings. A young man named David who'd lost his best friend to suicide. He sat in that room for an entire afternoon, and when he came out, he wasn't crying. He was calm. He was ready to keep living. But some of them didn't see anything. They sat in that room for hours and nothing happened. The glass of water stayed still. The air stayed empty. Whatever presence lived in Stone Ridge chose not to answer them. Ellie sat with them too, made them tea, listened to them talk about their losses. Sometimes that helped more than any ghost ever could. One evening after a particularly long day, Ellie went up to the third floor alone. She hadn't been up there in weeks, not since she had started bringing others. The room had become something she shared now, something that belonged to the community as much as it belonged to her. But tonight she needed to be there. She sat at Ashford's desk, opened his final journal, the one dated November 1971, the one with his last entry. She'd read it before that first night, but she'd been so overwhelmed by everything else that she hadn't read it carefully, hadn't absorbed every word. She read it again now, and she found something she'd missed, a passage on the second to last page. She must have skipped past it that first night, must have been so focused on his conclusion that she'd missed the words that came before. It read, "I came to Stone Ridge to find Elise. I was certain that if I stayed long enough, if I waited long enough, she would come to me the way the others came to my patients. I would see her one more time. I would tell her the things I never got to say. I would say goodbye." She never came. 9 years and she never came, not once, not a glimpse, not a sound, not even the feeling that she might be there just out of sight. I understand now. The house does not give back what we have lost. It does not undo the losses. It does not restore what was taken. It teaches us something else. It teaches us that we can survive without them, that surviving is not betrayal, that continuing to exist after loss is not disloyalty to the dead. I thought I needed to see Elise one more time. I thought that was the only way I could heal, but the healing came anyway, not through seeing her, through learning to live without seeing her, through learning that I could carry her memory without being crushed by it, through learning that love does not require presence. I am leaving Stone Ridge tomorrow. I am going back to the world. I will live whatever years I have left, and I will live them fully because that is what Elise would have wanted. Not a father frozen in grief, a father who kept going. The house taught me that, not by showing me my daughter, by showing me myself. Ellie closed the journal. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were full of tears. She'd been so focused on what the house could show people, so focused on the visions, the appearances, the impossible moments of contact. She thought that was the gift. She thought that was what made Stone Ridge special. But Ashford had understood something deeper. The gift wasn't the seeing. The gift was the permission. Permission to keep living, permission to let go, permission to survive without the person you'd lost and not feel guilty about it. Some people needed to see their loved ones to get that permission. And some people just needed someone to sit with them, someone to listen, someone to tell them that it was okay to keep going, that it wasn't betrayal, that it wasn't disloyalty, that the dead didn't want us to stop living. They wanted us to live enough for both of us. Ellie sat there in the third floor room. The moonlight was coming through the window. The ocean was loud outside. And for the first time in 9 years, she cried. Not the quiet tears she'd shed in her sleeping bag those first nights. Not the controlled, private grief she'd kept hidden for so long. Real crying, the kind that shakes your whole body, the kind that doesn't stop when you want it to, the kind that empties you out and leaves you raw and open and somehow impossibly lighter. She cried for Harold, for the 41 years they'd had together, for the morning she'd woken up next to him, for the tomatoes in the garden and the blue shutters and the sound of him humming in the garage. She cried for the 9 years since, for the pension that ran out, for the house she'd sold, for the car she'd lived in, for all the nights she'd spent alone wondering if there was any point in going on. She cried for herself, for the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become and the woman she was still becoming. And when the tears finally stopped, when her body had given up everything it had been holding, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace, not happiness exactly, not the absence of grief. Something else, something quieter. The knowledge that she had survived, that she would keep surviving, that Harold would want her to keep surviving, that loving him didn't mean drowning in the loss of him. It meant carrying him with her, lightly, the way you carry a gift instead of a burden. She stood up, wiped her face, looked out at the ocean one more time. Then she went downstairs. The town started calling it Ellie's place. Not officially. There was no sign out front, no website, no appointments or schedules or anything formal at all. People just knew. The way people in small towns always know where to go when they need help. The way information travels through communities without ever being written down. Word of mouth, whispered recommendations. A name passed from one grieving person to another. If you're carrying something too heavy, you can go out to that house on the bluff. The one the old teacher bought. The one that used to be wrong. It's not wrong anymore. It's a place where you can set things down. Ellie fixed up the rest of the house over the following months. The second floor became livable. Bedrooms with clean sheets and windows that opened. A bathroom with running water and a tub deep enough to soak in. A sitting room with comfortable chairs and shelves full of books. The first floor became welcoming. A kitchen where she cooked meals for visitors. A living room where she sat and listened to their stories. A dining room with a table big enough for 8 because sometimes people needed company more than they needed magic. She planted a garden on the ocean side of the house. Tomatoes because that's what she knew. But also beans and peppers and squash and all the things Harold used to grow in their garden back home. She'd paid more attention than she'd realized all those years of watching him work. His knowledge had soaked into her without her knowing it. She thought about that sometimes. How the people we love become part of us even after they're gone. How they live on in the skills we learned from them, the habits we picked up, the ways of seeing the world that we inherited. Harold was in this garden, not as a ghost, not as a presence, as a way of doing things, as a love of growing things, as patience and attention and the belief that life finds a way. That was enough. That was more than enough. Most nights, Ellie sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the ocean turn dark. The air smelled like salt and pine and the garden she'd planted. All mixed together, the smell of her new life, the smell of a home she'd built from nothing. Sometimes she heard footsteps on the third floor. Slow ones, deliberate, back and forth, back and forth. She didn't go up to check anymore. She knew who it was, Harold. Not trapped there, not haunting her, just present, still part of the house, still part of her life in a way that didn't require explanation or understanding. He wasn't asking her to come upstairs. He was telling her something. Every night with those slow footsteps, he was telling her that he was proud of her, that she'd done the one thing grief tries to stop you from doing, that she'd kept going. She'd bought a mansion nobody wanted for $250. And what she found inside wasn't treasure, wasn't a fortune, wasn't some secret that would make her rich. It was the one thing no amount of money can buy. A proper goodbye, and the courage to keep living after you've said it. The last visitor of the season came on a cool October evening. She was young, barely 30. Her name was Sarah, and she'd driven 4 hours from Boston because her sister had told her about this place. Her sister who'd lost a husband and found something here that helped her keep going. Sarah had lost a child, 3 years old, a daughter named Emma. She sat in Ellie's kitchen and told the story, her voice flat, her eyes dry. She'd cried so much in the past year that she had nothing left. The doctors said it was rare, 1 in a million, something wrong with her heart that nobody knew about. She went to sleep one night and never woke up. I found her in the morning, in her crib. She looked like she was sleeping. She looked perfect, but she was cold, and she wasn't breathing. And nothing I did could bring her back. Ellie listened. I don't know if I believe in any of this, Sarah said. Ghosts or magic or whatever it is that happens up there. I'm a nurse. I deal with facts, with science, with things I can measure and prove. But I'm desperate. I've tried everything else. Therapy, medication, support groups, nothing works. Nothing takes away the weight. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't look at other children without wanting to scream. I need something. I need anything. I need to see her one more time. Just once, just long enough to tell her I love her. Just long enough to say goodbye. Ellie reached across the table and took her hand. I can't promise you anything, she said. The house chooses who it answers. It might show you Emma. It might not. Some people sit up there for hours and nothing happens. But I can promise you this. Whatever happens, you're going to be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Because that's what we do. We survive. We carry the people we've lost with us. We learn to live with the weight. And sometimes when we're very lucky, we learn to live lightly. She led Sarah upstairs, opened the door to the third-floor room, watched her walk inside. Then she went back down to wait. 3 hours later, Sarah came down. Her face was different, softer, more open. The walls she'd built around herself cracked just slightly. She didn't say what she'd seen. She didn't have to. She walked to Ellie and hugged her, held on for a long time, and when she finally let go, there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Hope. Just a flicker. Just a spark. But it was there. Thank you, she said. 2 words. Enough. Then she drove back to Boston, and Ellie went out to the porch, sat down with her tea, watched the sun set over the Atlantic. The house was quiet behind her. The garden was done for the season, but she'd plan again in the spring. The American flag still hung from the railing, faded now, but still there. Somewhere above her, footsteps moved slowly across the third floor. Back and forth, Harold telling her he was proud. Ellie Brennan, 72 years old, alone but not lonely, sitting on the porch of a house that had chosen her. She sipped her tea, she watched the light fade, and she smiled. Because she knew something now that she hadn't known a year ago, something that had taken her 7 decades to learn. Life doesn't end when you lose someone, it just changes shape. And if you're brave enough, if you're stubborn enough, if you're willing to keep going, even when every part of you wants to stop, you find something on the other side of loss. Not a replacement for what you had, something new, something that's yours alone, something worth living for. Ellie finished her tea, went inside, climbed the stairs to the second-floor bedroom that was hers now, crawled into a bed with clean sheets and a warm blanket and a window that looked out at the stars. And she slept, peacefully, deeply, the way she would sleep every night for the rest of her life, in a house that wasn't wrong anymore, in a home she'd built from nothing, in a place where grief came to say goodbye and life came to begin again.